If you listen to the show, you already know that we cannot exist without our sponsors. They are the ones who make things happen behind the scenes. So let's acknowledge Fuji Sports. We've been working with these guys for a while now, not only as far as this podcast is concerned, but also at the RŌL Academy. We've had their gear. I personally use their gis. What a phenomenal product.
Yeah, I mean, Jiu Jitsu, Judo, MMA, tape, bags, anything you need for your Jiu Jitsu journey, you can find at fujisports.com.
Let's talk RŌL TV. There's so much content on there. It's ridiculous at this point. But I think what is even more intriguing, as time went on during the project, we've been recording most of the events that were taking place here at RŌL Academy. At this point, I mean, we have guys like Chris Howder, Armin Fati, Rafael Lovato Sr., and Pete the Greek. I mean, there are so many different events that we've kind of recorded it. Don't you think that's amazing? I mean, points of reflection and kind of going back for all the students to see what really happened and refresh their memory.
Yeah, I think it's great, you know, being able to go back and look at all these high-level practitioners, Octavio Cudo, like one of the names you didn't mention. And I mean, just these guys that have been doing this for so long come in, teach these amazing seminars and workshops, and it's all recorded and there for you to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to get additional savings on all this, type in code RŌL Radio at the coupon and get additional 30% off of your membership.
Nice. Go to rolacademy.tv. What's up, everyone, and welcome back. If you haven't already, please remember to hit the like, share, subscribe, download, listen, and whatever other button there is, and leave us a review wherever you do listen. That ensures that we can continue bringing you the great guests and amazing content that you have come to expect. Today's guest is trained under and with some of the most influential people in Jiu Jitsu. He is also an author and editor who has worked on some of the best books about BJJ. Scott Burr is here to discuss his relationships and training experiences with some of the legends of BJJ, the explosion of BJJ's popularity, Jiu-Jitsu as a vehicle to better one's life, and a ton more. Here's the RŌL Radio with author, instructor, coach, and third-degree black belt under Steve Maxwell and Rickson Gracie, Scott Burr.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we are live.
Here we go.
Take two. A jinx, yeah. Take two. All right, let's hope this is gonna work. Scott, welcome to the show. We're gonna bypass all the fluffy stuff at the beginning. Gary's doing great. Nobody cares about Gary at this point. But Scott, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. How is everything going on your side?
Things are going good, man. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And before we had the errors, you were talking about live jiu-jitsu lifestyle being good and treating you good, and you had an opportunity to meet some great people. Elaborate on a little bit more. How jiu-jitsu life has changed in the last couple of years comparison to prior to that?
Well, so prior to, let's call it 2019, I was running a school. I was like the head instructor at a jiu-jitsu school, and I was doing some cool stuff. I was traveling a lot with my main teacher at the time, Steve Maxwell. So I was getting to travel around and participate in some pretty cool events and meet a lot of cool people that way. But in 2019, I decided to close that school. I was just kind of moving in another direction in life. And I had also been writing the whole time. I studied creative writing in college and wanted to be a writer originally. And in 2019, I ended up meeting up with Richard Bresler, who was, at the time, he wanted to put out a memoir about his experience as Horian's first student and going through all that, the early days of jiu-jitsu, helping Horian get started, helping him start the academy, sharing a house with him, having the first Gracie, all those things, those amazing experiences. And it was just this perfect moment where, I had moved away from being an instructor. I wanted to focus on writing. Richard had this project he wanted to do, and we were able to collaborate on that. And through that, I was able to have other, I was able to work with Robert Drysdale on his first book. And I'm now working with Chris Howder on his book. So it's been a bunch of experiences like that, really stuff that I wouldn't have otherwise been probably involved with if I'd been focusing on running the school. But I'm getting to interact with the community of jiu-jitsu and the broader story of jiu-jitsu in a different way through those projects. So that's been really neat. It's been...
Some might consider you as the luckiest cat in the world. I mean, you are dropping some big names, and like, you know, we had some of these guys on our show. We had Chris Howder and Robert Drives. Actually, Robert visited my academy recently. So what a great personality. I love that guy.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, but you're talking about, you know, Steve and Richard, and talk about pioneers, or not even pioneers. It's like first-hand witnesses to the jiu-jitsu unfolding and literally in front of their eyes. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, would I agree with you that I'm the luckiest guy out? Yeah, I would probably agree with you on that too. Yeah. But those guys, those guys had the getting to spend that time, especially with Richard, going really into his story and sort of sitting there thinking about what it would have been like, you know, 1984. Horian is trying to get jiu-jitsu off the ground. They're going into karate schools and taekwondo schools and trying to convince these guys, and Horian's fighting instructors. Like, to be in that moment when this thing is on this wild, you know, uncharted journey into the American mainstream. It's like, what an exciting time to be part of this. I mean, it's exciting to be part of it now, but I mean, that era is so wild. And yeah, Richard and Steve are right there.
It has to feel surreal in a sense. Like you know, like I'm thinking about you sitting and talking to these guys while they're literally the first individuals who have witnessed some of this. And I mean, Chris Howder is not any different. I mean, you know, Chris goes way back to 80s, 70s, right? I mean, like hanging out with Machados and doing all these, you know, challenge matches and all that crazy stuff that Chris does. You know, and you are the listening ear in a sense. Like, you are just sponging the stories, and you have the creative mind in a sense to put that in some documented way and helping these guys document some of the history.
And you know, one of the things about it is that, like, I think we're reaching this moment where we you know, jiu-jitsu is exploding, right? And you have all these guys who are, you know, whatever, they're guys in their 20s. They started jiu-jitsu well after UFC 1. I mean, they weren't even born when UFC 1 happened. And so this stuff feels like it's just sort of it's a little bit being forgotten, because the main herd of jiu-jitsu now, so many guys coming in, they're kind of like, they're living the moment now. They have the heroes of today. They love Gordon Ryan. They love the Danaher Death Squad. They love these things. But like, and so there's this entire narrative that's so rich and so fascinating of those early days from, you know, 79 to and with Drysdale, obviously the era before that too, in his book in Brazil. But this era in America is such a unique period. And one of the points we make in particular, well, in both Drysdale's book and in Richard's book, is that all of us today, like, it doesn't have to be like this. We don't have to, jiu-jitsu didn't have to make it into the mainstream so that I, living in Ohio, could somehow interact with it and have my life enriched by it. It was created by these guys in their efforts to build this thing into what it is now. And so by reconnecting with those stories, it enriches my experience of what I'm now doing when I get on the mat and I learn this art. Because it, you know, I have a deeper appreciation of all that went into bringing it to this point, and that it seems like hopefully that's what these books can kind of accomplish for as we move forward, is that we move forward not only into the new cool stuff, into the future, but also with an appreciation of where we came from and those stories and those people and those efforts. So, yeah.
You know, and I think what's interesting, and you know, first of all, it's interesting that you say all this, because Gary and I, we often talk about this. Like, the main reason why we're doing this podcast is really to talk to some of these guys that, one, not many people talk to. And two, some of these stories will expire at some point if somebody doesn't document them. I mean, like, we all have
100%.
expiration dates, and I don't find myself as a second or third generation of jiu-jitsu. I'm like down the block somewhere, you know what I mean? But some of these guys, like Chris or Richard or Steve or Robert Drysdale, I mean, again, those are the originators, especially here in the U.S., where if nobody talks to them, nobody documents this, my kids won't even know who these guys are. Like, I feel like we have so much power in our hands from a perspective of talking to these guys and really providing a perspective how life or how jiu-jitsu used to be just 20 years ago. This is not that far back, is it?
No. It's very recent history. I mean, for the most part, I mean, I'm 40, and most of it is within my lifetime, right? So that's kind of crazy.
So would you agree with the fact that jiu-jitsu is so fast pace as far as the growth and evolution is happening? I mean, I don't know if there are many other sports that really within just few decades could come from non-existent to being so popular. I don't know if jiu-jitsu is mainstream yet, but it's definitely going that direction.
Yeah, certainly. That's an interesting question. I don't know enough about the history of other sports to know whether whether there's like the same rapid, like 30-year hockey stick, and then we sort of reach the modern iteration and stay in that. But I don't know. It seems like maybe that's just a symptom of an incredibly like a rapidly accelerating culture too, right? Like so many. Howder talks about this a lot in the conversations we've had about how there are so many advancements that have happened in the last 30, 40 years that have accelerated the pace of learning and the pace of evolution. Like, for example, like I was just editing part of the book this morning where we're talking about how in 95, when he's a brown belt, you have more competitions happening, more guys getting interested, more schools opening, and the old guard is a little bit fading. And so guys are not so worried about the old guard saying, no, don't open your guard, don't do this. So they're experimenting. And now because you have more competitions, the competition context becomes more relevant. So it's not, if I'm a guy who's going to do jiu-jitsu and I'm only going to compete in no striking grappling, I don't really care that I could get punched if I invert or something. It frees me up to do those sorts of things. But in 95, you only get that information by going to the tournament and seeing what new stuff's getting developed. But then the internet comes along, and then YouTube comes along, and now I can watch the finals of the Mundials live from wherever I am, and the next day I can be on the mat dissecting those moves, and like the rate is just fantastic, right? And so that may be happening with everything. It may just be it may be that jiu-jitsu came along at a specific moment in history when that's sort of, but I think about like baseball, right? I only know this because my dad got super into playing 1860s rules baseball, which is an incredibly specific subculture. But like modern baseball was more or less created in the late 1800s. And then by the 30s, you have professional baseball that looks almost identical to what we now have today, minus the size, the grandeur, the money, all those things, right? But, you have stadiums, you have professional ball players, you have people, right, buying tickets to go see a ball game. But that was coming about at a time when international news and international travel, so culture could start spreading faster around the country. So I wonder how much you could trace, or maybe this is all just to say the evolution of anything is inextricable from the environment in which it occurs, right? Obviously. So, which is also something Howder talks about all the time. So,
well, I was about to say,
yeah,
I mean, all of this, you are talking about the environment, you're talking about rules of engagement, you're talking about, I mean, we can break this down a million ways, but yeah, I mean, striking is not applicable at Worlds. It's not. So who cares about striking?
Right.
If you want to become a world champion, why the hell would you worry about somebody hitting you? Well, you wouldn't.
Right.
Does that make you any less of a jiu-jitsu player? No, you might not know how to defend yourself on the street, but that's irrelevant to what you're trying to achieve, right?
Right. Everything's a question of what your goals are, right? So figure out what your goals are, make your training about achieving those goals, and saying which one is better is kind of, I don't know, defining better is, even that conversation is kind of endless, right? So
well, yeah, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? I mean, that's essentially it, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So when you're working with the guys that are the generation before you and documenting all this, how do they feel about that? Do they feel that way, that define what's better, or you know what I mean?
I can hear Chris yelling.
It's interesting because Richard, right? We talk a lot in Richard's book about how the jiu-jitsu that he learned was self-defense oriented jiu-jitsu designed for the non-athlete, right? It was that classical Helio Gracie jiu-jitsu, the story we hear about what that jiu-jitsu is, and how important it is, because I would make this argument too, I guess, is that the question is, what is jiu-jitsu for? And if you look at judo, which, right, jiu-jitsu comes from judo, Maeda comes from the Kodokan. Kano took Japanese jiu-jitsu, he took the unarmed combat arts that he had studied or learned, and he created basically an education system that had three goals. One of the things was to provide a self-defense system. One of the things was to provide a physical fitness activity. And one of the things was to develop citizens. It was to develop the moral character of participants, which prior to Kano, it hadn't necessarily been part of it, as I understand it. So that idea that we all repeat now, that we all parrot of like, oh, martial arts develop you want kids who have good behavior and good discipline. Martial arts help develop these virtues. Kano basically pioneered that idea. And so the original intent of judo was partially to create better people, right? The quote is often that the purpose of judo was the perfection of man, that we would help develop him physically, spiritually, morally, all these things. And so there's a seed of that carried through, even though when it came to Brazil, it became very much about Vale Tudo. The seed of that in jiu-jitsu is carried on in Helio Gracie, things Helio Gracie said, like, my jiu-jitsu is for the weak, the timid, those who can't defend themselves, those who are scared to go out in the world. And these are things Rickson has said to me as well. So if you look and you want to say, what is jiu-jitsu for? And you say, okay, there are people who, because of their constitution, because of their upbringing, because of their whatever, they have the tools to overcome obstacles. They have the tools to go out and make a life and be engaged with the trials of life and still move forward with perseverance and not be beaten down and not be beaten by the things we all encounter. There are people who don't have that, and jiu-jitsu is there to give them those tools. So it needs to be accessible, and it's not necessarily for the people who already have those tools. Okay, so you could certainly make that argument that really jiu-jitsu is not for the tough guys in this way. Chris would say, on the other hand, right? Chris is fascinated by everything, right? So he's not going to judge. I mean, he says this a number of times in our interviews. The goal is not to judge the evolution. The goal is to observe and understand the evolution. So he says multiple times in the interviews we've done, I think it's great that guys want to explore the context of no strikes, no gi, grappling only, this rule set, that rule set. It's all interesting. It's not about deciding which one's better. The only way to decide which one's better is to decide what you actually care about or what context you're actually trying to participate in. If you want to go fight MMA, obviously it doesn't make any sense to go train at a sport jiu-jitsu gi school. Yeah. That's not the best use of your time and energy. That doesn't make a sport gi jiu-jitsu school bad. Is there a problem when somebody goes to a sport jiu-jitsu school thinking they're going to learn self-defense and they don't necessarily learn the best self-defense techniques? It could be a problem if they ever got into an altercation. But I mean, you're sort of splitting hairs. This is like, especially in Rickson says this as well, especially in the modern Western world, nobody's fighting on the street. This is not about necessity. Yeah. This is about what is going to offer something to people and what is it you enjoy. So if you like sport jiu-jitsu and your favorite thing is to think, and I mean, I've had training partners who do this. They love nothing more than to learn a 16-step sequence, drill that, and then go impose that. They love it. It's what their brain wants to do. It's what they get, the emotional kick from. I hate doing that. That's not interesting to me. That feels like rote, dead repetition to me. I don't think either of us is right. I just think one approach matches one guy and one approach matches another guy. So I don't even know if that answered your question, but
I don't know. But listen, it's fascinating to have this conversation because I unlike other sports, and probably you can provide a perspective here. Unlike judo, unlike wrestling, jiu-jitsu is there's the most gray area as to what real jiu-jitsu is. If you go into wrestling room, there is a very specific rules. You can do this, you cannot do this. That's it. It's done. You go into judo, there are specific rules. Yes. You watch all judo Olympics, there's specific rules. It just either you do it or you don't. Now, in jiu-jitsu, we are stepping into this gray area where, okay, you can hit. Well, that's jiu-jitsu. You can get punched in the face. Absolutely. But you can also bear and bolo. Okay, that's jiu-jitsu too. Hold on, let's take our jackets off. Now we're doing grappling. Now we can combine some sambo. There is a leg attacks. That's jiu-jitsu too. And this gray area creates this enormous diversity of motions and moves and comprehension points. And we're putting this huge library of things together and creating this art, this sport. Right? But there is not many rules that would define what really jiu-jitsu is this puzzle that's being still put together. It's not done. Nobody defines some of this. And many find this actually the most appealing part about jiu-jitsu, this creativity. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's really, I guess part of the thing I often come back to is like all of these techniques, how you break an arm, how you break a shoulder, how you choke a neck, all these things. When you put them in Japan and you collect them into a body of knowledge, you call it jiu-jitsu, right? But the term itself kind of just refers to fighting techniques that work in a fight. So if you sort of imagine, and I guess I'm talking like this because this is a lot of this is kind of Chris Howder language, but if you imagine one ancestral art that's everything, that's designed for a truly no rules context, right? There's biting, there's punching, there's hitting, there's small joint manipulation. You have absolutely everything. What you basically have is different quote unquote martial arts that we now study have taken subsets of that defined by parameters that are stylistic, that are rule-based, that are practice-based. So Taekwondo is, if you take part of this whole thing and you take only the kicks and the punches and you take out hitting in the head and whatever, and then sport Taekwondo is a subset of that. And if you take just leg locks, if you take just chokes, if you take just grappling, you take just throws, you take throws. So like of this total thing, right? So to me, I use the term, I learned from people who learn from the Gracies. I learned from people who learn from Brazilians. I learned from the Gracies. What I'm doing is Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. The rank I'm wearing is Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, right? But the idea is bigger than that. It's like, I'm trying to develop an understanding of what works in hand-to-hand combat in a no rules situation. And so the body of knowledge that I'm trying to study is the things that work in that. It's not about studying this martial art or that martial art or this martial art's better than that. It's all of these martial arts are kind of windows into truth about what's effective in that context. And so when we start getting down into these conversations about what jiu-jitsu is or isn't, it's weird. It's like I guess I feel like I think about it backwards from other people, where it's like I'm trying to get to, and this is one of the things that I feel like when I talk to Rickson, it's like this is the way Rickson looks at it too. It's like you're looking for the truth of hand-to-hand combat. You're looking for the truth of unarmed hand-to-hand combat. You're not looking for jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is a toolkit that's supposed to show you that truth. And so if that includes kicks, if it includes punches, if it includes eye gouges, if it includes all these things, that's what I'm getting to. So this is a road I'm taking to a truth. It's not its own point. And this may be a different conversation than what you're trying to ask. But like the point that you're circling is that the context defines the style, right? So whatever we say the rule set is, that's what the art becomes. And so now we're really talking about like branding or product creation, what we're gonna say this thing is and this thing isn't. And so to say like that we haven't defined what jiu-jitsu is, you're very right in that we have all of these. I mean, we actually kind of have an incredible variety of contexts in which to perform sort of specific adaptations of jiu-jitsu or these techniques or these strategies, each of which is a little bit different, and each of which is almost, I mean, which is why you hear people say like I'm a no-gi guy, I'm a gi guy, I'm a sub-only guy, you're already having people define themselves by the subgenre of jiu-jitsu that they're doing.
I think what's fascinating about what you're saying is that if like as I'm listening to you sharing some of these thoughts, is many will say, I want to learn jiu-jitsu. I want to learn this specific item, this specific thing, versus what you are saying is that I'm using jiu-jitsu to really have a deeper comprehension of something that's by far larger than anybody actually seeing. Like, and correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't want to misquote you or look at this wrong way, but I feel like you are talking about using jiu-jitsu as a vehicle to understanding life, I suppose.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think I feel like I encounter a lot is people trying to learn jiu-jitsu like it's this thing, right? Like I want to learn this thing. And to me, the point was when I learn, like maybe this is sort of a subset of what I'm talking about, but it's maybe illustrative of the point. When I learn a Kimura, what I'm really learning is how a shoulder works, right?
Yeah.
So that the Kimura is a lesson in anatomy or positioning or pressure or torque. It's not a lesson about itself. And so if you're always trying to look sort of through the techniques to the principle underlying the techniques that makes the technique work, you sort of start to realize that jiu-jitsu isn't the point. The study of the human being is the point, right? If I'm understanding how people respond under pressure, if I'm understanding why pressure would work on somebody, or why this specific leverage produces this specific injury, what I'm really learning is something much more essential than quote unquote jiu-jitsu. The jiu-jitsu is a method for studying something that has been true since the beginning of physiologically modern man, right? You go back 150,000 years, you apply torque to an elbow, or leverage to an elbow, you're going to pop the elbow, right? So you're learning about the truth about it, even on a physical level, the truth about the human mechanism. You're not learning jiu-jitsu, you're learning humans. And jiu-jitsu is a toolkit for exploiting that, for better or for worse. So yeah, I guess the idea would be you're trying to look through it into what it's really showing you, instead of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like, again, listening to you is almost like listening to Chris at this point. I remember when he was here, I was having a conversation with him, and it's like,
oh no,
I don't know how we got on the topic of sweeping or reversing, but he was like, look, reversing is not much different than walking. I mean, it's all about balance and control, and gravity pulls you down. It's just, if you make a step forward but there was no leg, you're gonna fall. It's just the gravity collapses you down. So if you apply the same principles to reversing or whatever, scissor sweep or whatever kind of reversing you're doing in jiu-jitsu, it's the same thing. It's just you're using a different vehicle, you're using a different tool to accomplish a motion against somebody else. But so many don't look at it that way. So many look at jiu-jitsu as grip the collar, can this, do this, there is a 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 steps, and boom, I achieve or I didn't achieve, I succeeded or I didn't succeed. And they look at it as this cookie cutter recipe for each individual motion or each individual goal, instead of having this larger comprehension of how mechanically this works.
Well,
sure.
We all do that with everything, I think, right? Until you have a deeper knowledge, you're only looking at the surface of what it is. You don't see what's behind it. It's a prism, but you haven't seen that yet. You're still looking directly into it. You haven't seen the reflection or anything else come through. And I think once people get a little bit more experience or years on the mat, they probably start changing that. When you bringing up the Kimura, instead of looking at it from, you start seeing it from everywhere, right? And then when you see it from everywhere, you realize what it is, and it is about the shoulder. It's not really about the grip, right? It's about the shoulder. And I think as people get more experience, they realize that it is a tool for something else.
Well, like almost going back to the previous idea of like, I think it's just people are, the way one guy approaches it and the way another guy approaches it too, just like, I can't not do this, right? It's like I studied English literature because my brain wants to look for subtext and it wants to look through text at meaning. And not everybody's like that. So I recognize that there's a similarity in the way I would approach reading and writing that I used to approach jiu-jitsu. And when I used to say a lot to, the longer I taught, the more I started to realize, like, I'm not everybody's teacher. The way I teach and the way I talk and the way I explain things, if you're like a literal nuts and bolts person, you're going to hate my class. And that's not because I'm wrong and you're right, and it's not because I'm right and you're wrong. It's because we're two different types of thinking. And you should go find a teacher who teaches the way you think, and vice versa. So it's like, yeah, I think there is a...
But Scott, that's applicable to everybody, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're world champion or Joe Schmo in a very small town. Those two individuals will teach jiu-jitsu very differently.
Sure.
And they might have a different knowledge base and different level of experience, but their teaching style will be completely different. And I think you touch on something really, really important in jiu-jitsu, finding that's a wrong word. Finding an instructor which can really maximize your education is the key. And this is not jiu-jitsu related. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is education, period. This is the same thing. You being in the 6th grade and your teacher sucks. Your teacher doesn't suck. You just don't connect, right?
Right.
Well, they might suck, but you know what I mean.
Well, you talk to those people who, like, their communication style is totally different, and even though you're both speaking the same language, you're missing each other all the time. It's like it's going to be hard to learn from that person. Or have a relationship with them.
So on that topic, who did you, after interacting with all of these individuals, picking their brains and going through these amazing stories that you get to listen to and experience firsthand, and then obviously helping with some of writing in some of these books and reading them and so on, who did you find, now hear this, the most intriguing
The most intriguing.
Who is the one who literally you scratch your head and you're like, damn, like what? Come back. Like, who got your attention so deep?
So there. So one of the things that I keep coming back to with working on Howder's book is that the last few things I've worked on, I've worked with, I work with like Bresler, Drysdale, and then I worked with two other people on two other books. One had to do with the patent system. One had to do with, it was another memoir. A guy was a trainer out in Hollywood for like 30 years. So both really interesting projects. And with each of those, I felt like I could kind of, I don't know how to say it. It's like I could see the borders. I could sort of see, okay, how's this person think? What's this story about? What are we talking about? And it was like I could see it all like I was looking at a map from the overview. Mm-hmm. And with Chris, I feel like not only can I not see the map, I'm like somebody dropped me in the middle of the jungle and I can't even see 50 feet around me. So it's like that's been a really interesting, and so the way we actually approached that project, I think really tackled that issue pretty well, but he is so brilliant and so variously interested, and let alone his life story, which I don't think people know, which is absolutely bonkers. So yeah, that's intriguing. There's just like, it's like, I feel like and I feel like he feels the same way in the world, which is that he's like Captain Kirk, where it's just like, go out and explore. Like it's just the universe is expanding and I'm expanding with it. And I feel like I'm trying to chase this down and put my arms around it to say like, no, we're just going to tell this story. And he's like, no, but what about that? What about that? What about that? What about that? So
believe me, I know exactly, and I haven't had as much interaction with Chris, but when he was here for the seminar, I felt like whoa, wait, hold on,
right.
wait, like, and he's going in 7 directions, but at the same time, I was like, whoa, I have a question about the thing we talked about 10 minutes ago. Like what?
Absolutely,
there's a lot of digression.
But that's what makes it so phenomenal, right? I mean, and again, going to the beginning of our conversation, there is so much information and so much passion inside somebody's brain, like Chris or Robert or many others that you have dealt with, or all the other instructors, that if they don't talk to somebody, if this is not documented in some way, I mean, think about the amount of knowledge that could be disappearing in the next few decades.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, gone. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of scary, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I may be a little more fatalistic about it in that, like, I this is not really on topic, but I eventually came to a place where I was like, look, every butterfly that was ever made was completely specific, right? They'd never be replicated, and they're all gone. And the world just makes new butterflies. And that's what it is. Right? So
wait a minute. Are you telling us that there's going to be a second Chris Howder coming up in the near future?
No, there'll be somebody different. There'll be another completely singular. Every single person is completely singular and will not be replicated and will disappear in time.
Yeah.
And that's just what this thing does. And so is it sad that these stories go away? I think the thing I choose to focus on maybe is what I said before, which is that when I know these stories, it enriches my experience of the activity that I'm part, the community that I'm part of, right? When I proceed in jiu-jitsu with an appreciation of the people who put in so much work to build this, the analogy I use a lot is that they built this incredible house that I get to live in and enjoy. I just get to have it. And, it wasn't just here, it was built by people. And when I understand that, that continuum that I'm a part of, it makes me feel connected to the community. It makes me feel connected to the phenomenon. It makes me feel a sense of that I'm doing something positive when I help carry that forward, that I'm part of that project, that it enriches those efforts. I mean, those are the things that I tend to get from these projects. Yeah, it's a shame when stories are lost, but stories are lost all the time.
No, I mean, true. I mean, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. I mean, listen, if I'm sure there is millions of stories that we haven't heard of and nobody ever will. And it is what it is, part of the human evolution and part of the nature of the world.
Yeah.
So, well, but listen, without people like you, more stories would disappear. So maybe, I don't know.
Right.
Maybe I'm looking at it from this different perspective. I don't know. Maybe you're a little bit spoiled. You know what I mean? Like hanging out with all these guys, and I'm kind of like drooling here, talking to you. Maybe that's the component between us here. But
yeah. I don't. Yeah.
it is what it is.
It's not precious enough to me because I'm drowning in Chris Howder stories. Yeah.
Keep rubbing in, Scott. Keep rubbing in. But listen, before life got so rich, and the last few years, and having all these opportunities, how did this whole thing started for you? When did you stumble upon jiu-jitsu? And this is another interesting question that I ask almost every guest that we have, because every single one of us has a different start. We all have somehow we trip over this jiu-jitsu thing, and then our life changes. Everything, and many of us continue on as a lifestyle for many, many decades ahead, but life is not the same after that moment when we started it. How did it start for you?
So when I was I was in another martial art before, like a lot of people who end up in jiu-jitsu. I was in a Korean style called Kuksul Do. That it's kind of the same art as Kuksul Wan, which is a little more well known. And it was, I was a 17-year-old kid. I was frustrated, wanted to learn how to fight, needed an outlet, and there was a Kuksul Do school in my town. And so, I had a friend who trained there, and he said, "Why don't you come check out this class?" And I went, and I loved it. I was kind of there every day after that. So I went through that, ended up getting a black belt in that after a few years, and then I went away to college. And was kind of training. I would come home in the summer and I would train, and I got my black belt when I was maybe a junior in college. And then by the time I got home I graduated in 2005, and when I got home, The Ultimate Fighter had happened. Season 1 had happened, and all the people who, kind of my main training partners were kind of like, you know what, this is kind of what's up. Like we all, because it was a really, the Kuksul Academy was a really neat school. Like it was very traditional. Had a lot of respect for the tradition that it came out of, but the people who trained there really were interested in being martial artists. They wanted, legitimate skills, as most of us do. And so when The Ultimate Fighter came around, we kind of said, "Oh, these guys are really doing it." And for some reason, prior to that, we'd had that attitude that maybe some traditional martial arts schools have, which is, "Oh, the Ultimate Fighting Championship is brutish. It's not real martial arts. It's not who we are. We want to be able to fight, but we have respect and honor and all those things." And UFC doesn't. And then The Ultimate Fighter came around to show the world that, these guys are martial artists. They're athletes. They're at the top of their game. And it opened our eyes, and we said, "Oh yeah, this is what we need to be doing." And so the head instructor, my buddy Jason, he said, we gotta start bringing jiu-jitsu into this. And there was a Royler Gracie purple belt. He was a purple belt at the time, named Donald Park.
I know Donald. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So he was teaching in Cleveland, and he was teaching out of an Aikido school. And so Jason went up and started training with him. And Jason would come back. He would like.
What year was this?
This is 2000 and this is the end of 2005, beginning of 2006.
Okay, keep going, and I'll come back to that why. Go ahead.
Okay. So Jason started bringing this stuff back, and he starts having, like, once a week we have an MMA night, and he's teaching jiu-jitsu, and we're sort of doing a lot of no-gi, but he's teaching kind of every lesson Donald would teach, he would come back and just teach us that. And So that's going on through like spring, summer. By the end of that summer, I'm starting to go up to this school too, but Donald has now left. He's gone to business school in Chicago. And is that when you met him?
I'll tell you the story in a moment. Go ahead, because our paths might have crossed. Go ahead.
Oh, really?
Go ahead.
Okay. So
Go ahead.
then a guy named Darren Branch, who's now also a Horler black belt, took over. He was like Donald's blue belt at the time. And so I started going up there, training with Darren. And so we kind of, I would go up there, I would train, I would come back, and we would train at the Kuxel Academy. And so as our interest in MMA is growing, and my interest in jiu-jitsu is growing, I'm kind of doing less Kuxel, more jiu-jitsu. And I reached this point where the head of the Kuxel Federation wanted me to test for second degree black belt and open up a Kuxel school. And I really was feeling much more drawn to MMA and jiu-jitsu. And I reached this point, I remember very clearly thinking like, okay, do I want a second degree black belt in Kuxel, or do I want a blue belt in jiu-jitsu? And I was like, I want a blue belt in jiu-jitsu.
That's a tough choice.
so I stepped away from Kuxel. I was just doing, we had a guy coming in once a week to teach Muay Thai. So I was doing Muay Thai, I was doing jiu-jitsu, and then I was doing these kind of MMA classes. And then Jason said, okay, let's open up. So he's in this light industrial complex, and he's like, I'm going to rent out the next door unit. We're going to put in a cage. We're going to put in all this stuff. We're going to open an MMA gym. And so we had the guy coming in teaching Muay Thai. We had Darren coming in once a week. And then we were growing that program. I was teaching like general MMA classes. I started learning more, interest sort of changed. After a couple of years, I don't know how much you want to go into all these nitty gritties, but eventually we hooked up with Steve. Steve was traveling around
Maxwell,
at
right?
the time. Yeah. And he came through and taught a seminar. He promoted Jason and I to blue belt. And we were kind of with Steve after that. So we'd catch him when he would come through Cleveland.
Isn't it interesting how, we talking about early 2000s, 20 some years ago. Isn't it interesting how, one, being a blue belt in jiu-jitsu was almost like invincible in a sense. Like purple belt was like, oh my God, purple belt. Like that's unheard of. Like,
no, like the
Gary
first
and I, we talked about it. I haven't met a
like,
brown belt for years. Say again, I'm sorry?
Well, the first seminar I ever went to was taught by a purple belt. And I was like, he's a god. He's the best martial artist I've ever seen. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I remember driving just hours to a class or seminar with a purple. Oh, brown belt was like, oh. I mean, we are in Chicago area, and like, when I started, there were I think 3 black belts in the entire like state.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was just mind blowing, and that's a major city. So, but things have changed since then. But anyway, going back to Donald, I don't remember which year this is. It's somewhere between 2004 and 5, somewhere there. But I'm traveling to Cleveland, and as a dorky blue belt that I am, every business trip that I do, I have my gi with me. It's a must. And I'm looking for a jiu-jitsu school, and I'm in Cleveland. And there's no jiu-jitsu in Cleveland besides this one place was being taught out of like a traditional martial art academy. And I don't remember what they were teaching, but it was some kind of traditional martial art. And I remember going in there, and they had a canvas flooring. They were not mats. It was canvas.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but they had canvas flooring, and it was semi-soft. There was some kind of cushion underneath it. But then they had these like typical Japanese privacy fencing. They were like folding ones. And behind those, you were changing. And this is when I met Donald, and he was a purple belt. And you don't know who Donald is. And shout out to Donald. I haven't talked to Donald in a decade, but he made huge impact on me. And I believe I attended 2 classes with him that week when I was there, and huge impact. But at that point, I'm I think around 170, 180, and Donald is like, what, $140 soaking wet? Like, he was a little guy, and he mopped the floor with me. Oh, my God. Like, you're a blue belt. Like, you're a blue belt, and at that time, like, I think I'm the shit. Like, I know what I'm doing. Like, I got jiu-jitsu down, and I meet Donald, and he does things that I have no idea what they are. Like, he completely changed the trajectory of my jiu-jitsu. Like, I remember sitting in a hotel that night, and I was like, what the hell was happening? I'm writing things down, the things that he was teaching me, like the whole thing. It was completely different path from that point. So anyway, Donald changed my jiu-jitsu, that's for sure. But what an interesting thing, because who knows? I mean, our paths might have crossed at that time. I don't remember exactly which year this was. But
yeah, for sure.
Am I describing the place that you were
100%.
that you trained at?
Yeah, very shortly thereafter, they actually took out the canvas floor and put in like actual swaying tatamis, which like everybody's feet were really happy after that, because that like the canvas mat like tore up your feet. But like that place was...
I remember sitting in a hotel and I was like, oh my God, my toes will never be the same. Oh, there's a different level of mat burn. But what a small world, man! Seriously. I didn't see this coming.
Do you remember that? Like, they had the altar up front with the samurai sword on it and stuff, and like,
yes,
like the bell that
absolutely.
You would ring. Oh yeah.
Man, I wish I took pictures. I have to dig through. Now I'm gonna go through all my pictures. I'm gonna look for this, because maybe I did. I don't know. I remember this like it was yesterday. What a small world.
Yes, seriously.
Look at that, Gary.
It's nice. It's bringing you guys together.
Look at this. Small world. Small world. Well,
yeah, that place
I never expected that one. But anyway, have you talked to Donald recently? Yeah. Now that we're going to
No.
Have you talked to Donald recently?
The last time I saw Donald probably, God, I was like, 2013 was probably the last time I saw him. And I ran into him in Chicago. Rickson taught a seminar in Chicago at like LCCT. Is that right?
Yeah.
Those guys. Yeah. And I ran into Donald there, and I think that was probably the last time I saw him.
Yeah, I haven't seen him. I mean, we exchange messages back and forth over time, but I haven't had the opportunity to train with him since that day. So there was, but man, now my mind is going different directions. I can't even believe this. Like, I don't even care to talk about anything else. Look at this.
Yeah, no, big shout out to Donald. I think
I would love to get him on this podcast. I mean, he probably doesn't remember me, but it's but this is interesting, right? Look, how one event, one conversation, one day, 1 hour could literally change a lot. And I'm wondering if you had those moments doing what you do today. And one, teaching jiu-jitsu, but also interacting with some of these guys. I mean, I know you interacted with Rickson quite a bit in the recent times, and many would pay millions to just have some one-on-one time with Rickson. And again, you are the lucky cat,
Seriously.
and we had Chris Burns on the show recently, and another guy who, like it. Do you find yourself in these moments where, like, damn, this changes everything? This just literally put me on a different path.
The one that comes to mind would be I mean, there were a number of them now that I look back on, but like I can remember, like maybe there are some things that I look back on now and I realize I didn't realize at the time, but so clearly the trajectory changed. Like, I remember when Steve promoted me to purple belt, I was sort of teaching MMA classes and I was teaching Muay Thai classes, and then I was teaching like jiu-jitsu, what I knew as an advanced blue belt. And at that time I had kind of been, like, I think a lot of times we get into jiu-jitsu and we when we get the belts, it makes us feel bigger. It makes us feel like, like we're thinking about ourselves. We're thinking about adding to me when I get that belt. When I'm a blue belt, I'm this. When I'm a purple belt, I'm this. I feel bigger. And he promoted me to purple belt, and he, and that we kind of did the seminar. And afterwards, we were back in the office changing, and I kind of said, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And he said, purple is a really heavy belt. He was like, purple's the belt at which it's the equivalent of a black belt in another style in terms of probably the skill and in terms of the fact that you can now be an instructor. He's like, so think about what it means to you that you're going to carry that rank and represent as a senior, basically as a senior rank in this art. This is not just about you and you getting cool new toys now. This is about you as a representative and a teacher and somebody with a responsibility to carry this technique, this knowledge forward. Because I've invested this knowledge in my teacher's invested it in me. I'm investing it in you. What are you going to do with it? And that profoundly shifted my focus as a teacher and as a practitioner. Which, looking at it now, I mean, I can see how distinctly different my life would have been had I probably not had that conversation. And then experiences with Rickson, conversations that I've had with him or things he said to me have really been very impactful. When I met him, I'd done that Rickson seminar in 2013, the last time I saw Donald. But then I didn't, that was I was one in the crowd, right? And then in 2017, Eddie Fivey did that big Rickson seminar in Rickson Gracie Cup in Albany. And that was where I met him. He, pulled me out of the crowd. I was using me as a demo dummy. I was on the mat with him for a while. And I talked to him afterwards, and I was like, okay, how do I train with you more? Because I had reached this point where I was feeling very frustrated with my jiu-jitsu. I was like a first-degree black belt, and I just felt like I'd hit this wall where I wasn't developing anymore. I wasn't getting new breakthroughs. It was like the tools I had used to get me to a certain level that was where they were going to get me. My understanding had gotten me to this understanding, and that was where they stopped. And I couldn't everything I looked around and saw people teaching, it just seemed like kind of more of the same. It was like more stuff and not more depth. And I was like, I need to talk to Rickson. And my girlfriend was like, well, how do you talk to Rickson? I was like, you don't. Rickson doesn't talk to anybody. And it just so happened, it just so happened that day they had announced the Albany seminar. And I was like, great, I'm signing up. And so a few months go by, I go to that thing, I meet him, and I basically, I reached this point where I was like, I was going to go out for a weekend of private lessons. And I told all my guys, I was like, as a first degree black belt, I was like, if I come back with a purple belt on, that's what it is. I don't care. I want to know what he's doing. If he says I'm a purple belt, I'm a purple belt. I don't care. And that moment of feeling so stuck and uncertain and just in a weird limbo, and then to just say, no, I'm like, this is the path I'm going to go on. And then Rickson sort of like being there to like, I don't know. I was like, do you guys ever read Jonathan Livingston Seagull? Did you ever read that book?
I did not, no.
I know.
So there's that moment, he's been flying and like none of the other birds are kind of like getting what he's doing, and he's kind of ends up isolated. And then at the moment he's like the most isolated, these other birds come from somewhere else and they're like, okay, come with us. Like this is, you're supposed to be with us now. And it was like, at that moment in my jiu-jitsu, Rickson was like one of those other birds. He was like, okay, come on. Like we're going to talk about some other stuff now.
So what has changed? The jiu-jitsu prior to Rickson to the jiu-jitsu with Rickson?
Well, there are a few things I could point to. Physically, there are things that have changed. Technically, there are things that have changed. Strategically, there are things that have changed about my actual practice of jiu-jitsu. But the biggest thing that I come back to is, I think once I started spending time with him, I got to this idea that there are kind of two ways people approach martial arts. And one is like the Tai Chi way, which is, the concept is, I'm here, I'm centered, things are going to come into my world and try and push me off where I am, take me out of peace. And I need techniques that are going to diffuse that energy. But the goal is to remain where I am. And in some ways, you could say that, and I'm probably going to say something terribly offensive to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about or appreciates this culture. But I was going to say, you kind of see how this might be an offshoot of a culture of sort of like where you think about karma, where you say, where I am is where I'm supposed to be, and I'm not thinking about changing my life, right? I'm thinking about being in my life, and maybe one day something comes into it and I don't want to get negatively impacted, so I need a way to diffuse that energy. So the Tai Chi kind of martial art, where you're trying to stay centered, you're trying to not get disrupted, and you're trying to ward off negative impacts. And so that's one sort of concept of the martial arts. But the goal of that concept of the martial arts is I sort of stay where I am. The second concept is life is about going after things. I got to pick a goal and I got to go after it, because when I'm waking up inspired, trying to problem solve, I'm in the process, I'm going after something, that's living. When you don't have that, you don't have a reason to get out of bed, that's nothing. That's that's a bad place to be in. So to engage with life is to engage with, I have a goal, I'm going after it, I'm being proactive, I'm pursuing. And so within that concept of the martial arts, the tools that you learn are for problem solving and avoiding and navigating the obstacles that you encounter when you are providing the forward motion. It's kind of like this. You can stand in one place and the wind can blow against you, or you can run and the wind can blow against you because the air is still, but you're moving. And I think before I met Rickson, my personality, my general outlook on life, and my jiu-jitsu were very much the former. It was very much like, okay, I'm here and let's see what blows into my life and let's see what happens. And I hope nothing bad happens, but mostly I just want to get to stay where I am. And I realized in talking to him that what was missing from my jiu-jitsu and what was missing from my life was this like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen, but I got to go out there and I just got to go do it. And the things I encounter, I have my jiu-jitsu for, meaning I have my ability to problem solve. I have my ability to think in terms of efficiency, in terms of effectiveness. I have my ability to predict problems and make a strategy to avoid them. I have all those things, and I have to just trust in them and be willing to say, I don't know what happens next, but life happens out there. It doesn't happen in here. It happens out when you go and stuff. And so that understanding that so much of what I'd experienced in my life prior to that, where I'd spent, my 20s and 30s waiting for somebody to come along and drop into my life and say, oh, we love your writing, let's publish your book, or let's do this, let's do that. Like, it's like you're the passenger in your life, Mm-hmm. And I honestly, I don't know if other people would say this about me, but I felt like this about me. I felt like there was too much passenger mentality in my life. And I didn't know what the problem was until Rickson started saying like, okay, you're 16, you want a car, you want a girlfriend, you got to, you make a strategy, you make a this. It's like, oh shit, that's what I don't do. That's why my jiu-jitsu is like, I'll hold you in side control. You can't get out of side control, but I don't have the kill. I don't have the like, oh, I'll go forward when it's there. No, it's like, go kill. What's your go kill? Oh, I don't have a go kill, right? Because I just want to be left alone. I'm only fighting you because you won't leave me alone. No, why don't you go beat him? Oh, that's a different mentality than I have.
Scott, as I'm listening to this, many would say out there, they would say, you spend all this time with Rickson, you you have access, one-to-one, one-on-one access with arguably the biggest mind, jiu-jitsu mind there is alive at this point. The biggest person who impacted jiu-jitsu singly. I mean, between his, teachings and pride and everything that he's done. And you didn't learn jiu-jitsu. You talk about, birds, you talk about, cars and girlfriends and all the other stuff, but you didn't learn jiu-jitsu. What's wrong with you, Scott?
Right.
And isn't this interesting how, again, we're going back to the same thing we talked about like mid-episode, right? But jiu-jitsu is a vehicle how to look at this larger picture.
Right.
It's not necessarily these locks or holds or pressure. There is so much more to all of this that many of us don't see.
Isn't his quote that you already knew everything you needed to know by a blue belt? It's what you do with it. It's that type of mentality. So
I
you already
hadn't heard
had
that.
the tools. I'm pretty sure it's him because when I was, long story, but anyway, you already have everything you need. You just don't know how to use it yet. And I think when you run into somebody like Rickson, like Howder, they're kind of unlocking the potential that you have. You already have the toolbox. It's that potential that you haven't tapped into yet. And I think that so it's like would it be a waste of time if you sat with Rickson for a few hours and just went over techniques and like refined techniques? Would that be a waste of time? Wouldn't you want to tap into, something deeper that he's got going on? Because, I mean, you probably find that technique, somebody to shine all that up for you someplace else. You don't need Rickson for that. You need him for that other stuff.
No, and I think he's
cool.
I think that's kind of a lot of what he's saying.
Am I wrong about that?
No, I don't think so. I think he talks a lot about like how his focus is not on teaching technique now. His focus is on helping people to implement these strategies in understand how to reframe their own, basically reframe their own mindset via this vehicle of jiu-jitsu. But the understanding is very much that what happens on the mat is it's a way to talk about something else. And it's actually a very small part of his overall vision of what jiu-jitsu is and how it should be part of people's lives, or how it could be part of people's lives for their betterment, for their benefit,
Yeah. I'll tell you, Scott, you're a lucky cat. You're
Seriously.
a lucky cat.
Seriously.
Everybody who's listening out there, they're literally, and including me. Listen. I'm drooling. I'm jealous. I mean, I would give up a lot to have the opportunities that you have. So good for you.
Thanks.
I'm really happy for you, and continue spreading that. I mean, because that's, I think, what jiu-jitsu is all about. To passing on some of the knowledge as this beautiful sport and art continues on growing. As we kind of slowly coming to the end of this conversation, what we do at the end of every episode is we have a question for you, but from our previous guest. The trick is that he didn't know who will be answering the question, so think of it as he asked it completely in blind. Okay. It is a black belt, and Gary's going to take a lead on this, and it's going to create an interesting end to the show.
Yeah. So this is from Malachy Friedman. And he wants to know, what do you think is the most important drill for each belt prior to training? So he gave an example of like De La Hiva for the blue belts. So is there something prior to your training as a white belt you should be working on? This, blue, that, purple, something else?
Is the question is a specific move, or is the question is like when you're preparing to get your next belt, what should you be focusing on?
I think so. Like prior to training as a blue belt, you should be concentrating on this.
I think the interesting part about these questions from other guests is that we really don't know what they meant, and we can't really ask them. So you know what I mean? Like, what would be your what would be your expectation of a drilling strategy or something that somebody might need to know based on the different levels of their experience? How about if we spin it that way?
Well, I think probably the way I break that down is pretty similar to the way a lot of people break it down, which is that, white belt's about survival, blue belt's about escaping, purple belt's more about offense, brown belt is about refining both of those, and then black belt is when you've refined those to a high enough level. And so I think kind of like, I mean, I've spent a lot of time focusing on, movement patterns and solo movement pattern drills. So the white belt would just be trying to develop good habits of like making sure when you turn on your side, your shoulders and your hips are turned on your side, and making sure you're keeping your elbows in and you're not reaching out to try to generate motion. And then the blue belt would be focusing on making sure their escaping motions are very smooth, that your hip away is very smooth, and that you're sort of starting to develop a sensibility for when you would want to time those movements with an opponent's movements. And then purple belt, I would do a lot of, I guess maybe I'm just repeating what I kind of did. Purple belt, I spent a lot of time doing positional maintenance, like I just really focused on the things that when I'm holding you in a position, what do you need to escape and how do I take those things away? And then brown belt, it's kind of like make sure everybody's at a good level and then just keep making it better. And then, one day if you don't piss anybody off, you get a black belt.
There's some truth behind that. Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you something on that. I completely slipped my mind now, so I screwed up. I know what it was. So, like, going back to being the lucky cat, right?
Yeah.
You've interacted with a lot of people, and I think truly, I really appreciate the fact that you actually do stuff that you do. I think the next generation is much better off with people like you doing what you do, and doing the keeping that sport for what it is, and the art and sport and a lifestyle for what it is, and continue allowing them to explore some of these opportunities, but at the same time interacting with a lot of these guys, it spoils down for you a little bit, in my opinion at least, right? Like the bar gets lowered. Like a lot of people look up to Rickson. You've met Rickson. A lot of people look up to Chris Howder. You've met Chris Howder. A lot of people are about to Drysdale. Oh, you've met Drysdale. You're with him. What's on your bucket list? What's on Scott's bucket list at this point of time? What would you like to see in Jiu-Jitsu? What would you like to feel, learn, achieve from the art or sport perspective?
Wow. It's funny that you say that, because it's like I have one student that I work with a lot, and he's in that mid brown belt period where when he comes in, I go like, okay, what do you want to work on? And he'll go, oh, I need to get better at everything. And I go, that's not an answer.
Heard that before.
You need to know what you like. Pick one thing and get better at it. Because if you want to get better at everything, you'll get better at nothing. I mean, you'll slowly get better at things, but when you focus it, you can really start to. It's like saying, I want to get better someday. Well, show me. Yeah. Go to the calendar and show me someday. I don't know where someday is.
Yep.
So, I say this to him all the time, and at the same time, I don't have a good answer for it. Right? I don't necessarily have a good answer for like, what am I working on? What am I trying to develop? My goal right now is to spend as much time with Rickson as I possibly can. And I think my goal in general is to continue to get to work on interesting projects. And I think one of the things I'm kind of hoping for, or one of the things that's, because jiu-jitsu is in such a flux state, right? And because there are so many subcultures, and because there's so much disagreement between, what jiu-jitsu is, who it's for, what it's about, what the style should be. And then because there's all this new influx of participants, it's sort of an interesting time to be in jiu-jitsu, and to have connections to people who are trying to do things like Rickson's trying to do with the JJGF, to try to provide a framework and a resource to help, I don't want to say shape the culture moving forward, but sort of like tend the garden of the culture, where you want to water some things, you want to pull some weeds, you want to try to help this grow in a positive direction. And so I don't know exactly, like when I closed my school, I had a really weird time with it, because I was kind of like, okay, if I'm not teaching jiu-jitsu, what's my point? What's the point of me? What am I doing? Like, how am I contributing anything? And by getting to work with Richard and Drysdale and work on these different projects, it's kind of given me the opportunity to give more than I was giving to my little pocket of students, to reach more people, and to have a hand in contributing to the things that I think of as positive things in this community. And so I don't know exactly what that all is or would entail moving forward, but I think there are things that I can do in storytelling. There are people I can. I mean, I'm actually talking to another kind of pretty big name in jiu-jitsu about a project he wants to work on, and so these sorts of things where I have the opportunity to contribute. You know, I have this very specific skill set, you know, the writing, the editing, the publishing, the promoting. These things they're just the tools that are in my toolbox now because of the way I spent my life in developing these tools. And so the way I get to have the opportunity to deploy those to help contribute to this community, I don't know exactly what that is necessarily after Howder's book, but that's what I'm really inspired by. So I love doing jiu-jitsu. I love learning the techniques. I love being on the mat. I love perfecting my armbar and all this stuff. But on the bigger picture, to be part of the conversation about what this thing is on a little bit of a bigger level, is really interesting to me. And so I think that's kind of where I see the next maybe 5 years going or something like that.
And honestly, I'll tell you, this is one of the main reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because it is quite remarkable and also very inspiring to be in your shoes or watch you do what you do and being involved in jiu-jitsu in a very unique way. I mean, not many have this opportunity, and at the same time, not many have these responsibilities to present this in such a way and use the skill that, you know, as you have. You know, there's not many people like that, and good for you. I mean, this is what makes it beautiful about this sport. And again, I personally do appreciate, I do appreciate what you do. So I'm glad you stopped
Thanks,
by.
man.
I'm glad we had the opportunity to chat, and look at that. I mean, we probably trained together. You probably beat the crap out of me back in 2004 or whatever.
Oh,
Who the hell
2004.
knows? You know,
Yeah,
you were probably the, you were the muscle for Donald back then.
Thomas always says he was a horrible training partner right there. So if you remember some awful person from Chicago, it's like, oh, it was that guy.
Who the hell knows? But it made a great conversation. Scott, before we wrap it up, anything in any, first of all, website, social media, anywhere that people can find you, perhaps somebody might be interested in conversation with you or engaging with you. How can people connect with you?
So I have a website, enclavejujitsu.com, ENCLAVE. I also have a website for my writing, scottburrauthor.com. You can find Enclave on social media at Enclave Jiu-Jitsu. You can find author stuff on Facebook at Scott Burr Author. And also, if anybody wants to check out blackmarketkimonos.com is a travel gi company that a couple of my training partners and I started. We're just getting it started up. But if you travel a lot and you're sick of your gi taking up half your carry-on, we make a gi that's all ripstop, and so packs down really small, and you can just throw it in your carry-on, and it's not going to take over your luggage. So check that out. That's on social media as well at Black Market Kimonos.
As always, we'll post all of the As always, we'll post all of the links in the description of the episode. So feel free to check Scott out, check out all his stuff, check out all the projects that he works on, and if you want to connect with him directly, then obviously take the opportunity and pick his brain. It seems like it might be worth it. It might be worth it.
Appreciate that.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your life, your wisdom, and all the experiences that you've had on and off the mat. What a great conversation it was, Gary.
Yeah, thanks for everything. I really appreciate your style and what you're putting out there. And definitely when Chris's book is done, you got to come back. We want to talk to you again.
That'd be great, man. I love it. Thank you guys so much. I had a blast doing this. I really appreciate it.
Cool, man. And thanks for sticking around through those early hiccups. Those first 8 minutes were kind of rough.
Just like Jiu Jitsu, right? You got to troubleshoot. You got to work around things. Yeah, it is what it is.
Cool.
All right, let's wrap this up. Thanks, Scott, and we'll see you around.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.